Welcome, everybody. We are joined today by my longtime friend, Ben Collins, who is the Google Sheets instructor. And before we pass the baton to Ben to hear all of his insights about what Sheets is great for, what are his favorite features, what are the most surprising features, we want to hear all about his personal reflections using Sheets for so many years. But first, let's hear from you. So use the chat window. Let me know who you are, your title or role, where you work, where you're from. I'll read off the first couple chat messages that come in. So as you know, I'm Ann Emery, and I'm a data visualization designer and speaker, and I'm joining you today from really cloudy Orlando, Florida. Usually it doesn't stay rainy all day, but today it has. Okay, so let me see who else is here. Vivian is in a research office of a large school division in Virginia. Andrew's an internal evaluator and data visualizer, currently in early educational professional development. Cynthia is the associate director in a collaborative in Los Angeles. Kristen is a consultant with Equal Measure, joining from an equally cloudy Philadelphia. Bobby is a graphic designer for a pension fund manager. Ben, you don't have to introduce yourself. We know who you are. We're going to have you give a full introduction in a minute. Ben says he is the Google developer and online course instructor. Madison also works in evaluation. Okay, great. And now let me know again in the chat window, what's your current experience or your prior experience with Sheets? Do you use Google Sheets a lot? Do you use it a little bit? What have you used it for, if anything? Give me some specific examples so Ben kind of knows who's here. You know, you feel like you're expert, you use it all day, every day for all sorts of different things. You've never used it before. So I'll tell you that most of my client projects are in Excel just because that's what the client happens to use. But most of my personal projects are in Sheets. Things like my work budget for all of the work expenses, household budget. And that's just because it's easier to share that way, I think. I mean, I guess I could make a budget in Excel and send my husband a Dropbox link. It's just easier just to send him a URL or a text message, and then he's got the budget sheet. So my budget, for example, I was working on it this weekend because we were buying $1 billion worth of solar panels, and I wanted to make sure they fit in the budget. I just have all the categories that we track.
And it's a cloudy day.
On a cloudy day. I know. That's why I was like, wait a second, is this a good investment? Maybe not. Maybe not. I have till Wednesday to cancel. So, but I have all my categories listed out, and then I have one column per year and some very light visuals, just some color-coded heat tables so I can spot some patterns, but that's about it. That's mostly what I use it for. Okay, let me read the chat and see what you all use it for. Bobby says, I've never used Google Sheets. Bobby's our graphic designer in the group, so that makes sense. Lisa says, this is very new to me. Cynthia says, a bit to move registration data to systems networking map on Kumu.io. I'm not familiar with that. That's a new one for me. Madison uses Google Sheets more than Excel. Interesting. Andrew says, I don't use it professionally except as an input to Google My Maps. Vivian says, I've used Google Sheets to collect data from surveys in Google Forms. Yeah, that's another thing I use it for. I'll set up a satisfaction survey in the forms. And then, of course, on the back end, it links to Sheets. And Kristen says, I've used Sheets for personal projects too. And like Vivian, have used Sheets when we've used Google Forms. Okay, cool. Okay, Ben, let's hear from you now. We've told you about us, but tell me about yourself and your business.
Sure. So, hi everyone. Ben Collins here. I am not from America originally, as you might have guessed from the accent, from England, and came here about 8 years ago, actually. And so, like Anne, I work for myself. I have my own business and primarily teaching online courses using Google software. So some of that encompasses data visualization, some is data analysis, some is coding, but it's all around G Suite and spreadsheets. So there's quite a lot of overlap with what Anne does. And yes, I've been doing this working for myself for about 4 or 5 years. Prior to that, I was an accountant. and I spent my 10,000 hours in Excel. And I think that's sort of how I learned to use the spreadsheet quite well. And then that served me well when I moved across to doing my own thing and using Google quite a lot. So I'll share two anecdotes with you, actually, just so you get to know me a little better from when I arrived here in the US. I'd not been here for very long, maybe just a few months, and I had to ring up one of these, one of the cell carriers to talk about my bill or something. So I ring up Verizon, I'm on the phone, and the lady asks me what state I'm in. And I say, well, I'm pretty upset, actually, because your service is not very good. And then she says, no, what state are you in, sir? Well, look, I'm getting really upset now because you're not helping me. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. She means what state? She means Virginia. So that was one of the first, one of the early memories I have from moving here and realizing that we are two nations divided by, what's the phrase? It's two nations divided by the ocean or something. We speak the same language basically, but it is a little bit different. Then the other anecdote is a couple of years later, I was in Washington, D.C. teaching an Excel class for General Assembly, not the big General Assembly, but the startup General Assembly that teaches online. I was teaching an Excel class, and one of the students put her hand up after a sort of 10 or 15 minutes into the class and asked me why I kept talking about calamari. She said, I'm starting to feel quite hungry now. Why do you keep talking about calamari? And I was scratching my head thinking, what? Everyone was scratching their heads thinking, what? And then I realized that I'm saying column A in Excel, and she was hearing calamari the whole time. So if I say it too quickly, column A, calamari, column A, calamari. So today I'll be just talking about spreadsheets and columns. So there we go. So to this day, even, I still every day I find new words here in America or new meanings or new understandings. So it's been an interesting journey. But here we are today.
I didn't realize that you'd only moved here 8 years ago. When did you and I meet? I feel like we intersected on Twitter. It could have been like 7 years ago. Do you remember?
It was pretty early on, actually. I'd been here, maybe 18 months sort of time. So that would be about right.
And I remember we met up for lunch in downtown DC when I would have worked in downtown DC, which would have been almost 7 years ago, because I worked for myself about 7 years now. You said you're on year 4 or 5 of self-employment?
Yeah, I would say 5 years of working for myself and 4 years of actually earning money for myself. So I don't know if you count that first year or not. So actually what I started was I really wanted to be a web developer. So that first year I spent a lot of time transforming the Excel and SQL knowledge that I had into coding knowledge. And then by the end of the year, I still hadn't got a coding job. So, but what I did have was a blog, which led to client requests for projects. So I started actually doing freelance work there. And around about that same time, actually, General Assembly, that company I mentioned, came along and asked me to teach their Excel class and their data analytics class. And that's sort of how I got into the teaching side of things.
When you and I first met, you were blogging on a variety of tools. I think you said you had blog posts on Excel, Google Sheets, maybe a couple other tools kind of in that similar family. But over the years, you've made a really intentional shift to Sheets. So just tell me kind of how you decided to focus on Sheets.
Yeah, sure. So you're right. When I started the blog, as I said, I was trying to be this web developer, and the advice actually, and this is great advice, I think, for any kind of career move you make. You want to put yourself out there a little bit, build your portfolio, and so the advice was to create a blog, write about topics. So I was writing about all sorts. So there was Excel, there was SQL, there was Ruby on Rails, how to do unit testing, how to do what else was there? Like I said, SQL stuff. It was all over the place, really, which means you don't really get that much traffic because you get little bits coming in, but you don't really have a theme to your blog. And one of the posts I did have, though, was about building dashboards in Google Sheets. I had a dashboard post for Excel, which was this dashboard showing all these political the political orientation of the US over 100 years sort of thing. I thought that was a really great project, but nobody ever looked at it. And then I did a fairly simple dashboard in Google Sheets that really got pretty popular on Google search. And that actually led to the first few client requests of people saying, hey, can you build me a Google Sheet dashboard? And so what I then realized was Excel has this cottage industry of professionals who create courses, create tutorials, teach, do consulting work. And it's a pretty big industry on the back of Excel to help businesses be better at using Excel or provide solutions. But 5 years ago, there was next to nothing for Google Sheets that was equivalent. And partly, obviously, that was because Google Sheets was very small and just still relatively unknown. And but as Sheets has grown, there's been this void where there isn't yet that sort of same cottage industry on the side. And so I think that just mostly by luck, I just happened to sort of start writing about it right at the right time when it took off. And, when I saw that, I actually talked to another Excel blogger who runs ExcelJet that you know as well, Anne, actually. And he, when I spoke to him, I was asking for some advice, and he said if I was starting over again today, I'd start focused on Google Sheets and the Google products because the potential there is huge and nobody's yet doing it. So when he said that, I sort of thought, okay, I think there is something to this, and kind of over the next 18 months, just gradually doubled down on the Google software. Probably about early 2017 is when I really just sort of went all Google, if you like. Sold my soul.
Ben's referring to Dave Bruns from exceljet.net, and he has also given me excellent life advice that I have followed, and I should write him a note and say how thankful I am. So it's cool to hear that you've learned from him
pass
too.
on my thanks to that, actually. And if you're not familiar with his site, exceljet.net, I think it is, it's really is a really awesome site for Excel knowledge.
Okay, Ben, I've got a whole list of questions about your personal reflections on Sheets, the stuff that we can't just Google, and find out. Okay, what is your favorite thing about Sheets?
So I don't have one single favorite thing. I guess I have a few I'll mention, I think. So I think, first off, just that it's so easy and accessible. I think that helps. You just pop in your browser and it's type sheets.new into your browser. That's a little tip for you, actually. Opens up a brand new Google Sheet for you. So, it's really quick just to get started, really easy to use. The next thing I'll mention is what people mentioned actually in the chat there, is you take a Google form, you link it to Google Sheets, and then collect that data, do a little bit of analysis, maybe create a chart, and then embed that chart in a slide. And what I love is that whole pipeline is all linked. So if somebody then fills in the form again, that data flows all the way through to the slide, to the actual chart on the slide, and that just updates. You have to click a little button to update it, but it syncs all the way back to the form. So it's a great way to collect that data. So it's kind of taking what we talked about in that sidebar there, but taking it one step further. So if you do have a presentation you want to give and you want to make sure that chart is always up to date. When I worked as an accountant, this is going back now a decade, we would have, as a deadline loomed, everyone would get a little bit more frantic as the deadline loomed, and the changes would start coming through quicker and quicker and quicker. And it meant you had to sort of take your slide, delete the chart, update your data, copy paste the new chart in, send it to the boss, and then it would come back half an hour later with another change or another data point to add in, and you'd repeat up until the deadline when you were forced to stop doing that. But at least with this workflow, you get the chart, but the slide is just there and it's up to date all the time for you. Then a couple of other things that I love about Google Sheets. There's a function called the query function that you don't have in Excel. And the query function is very, very powerful for doing data analysis. It uses sort of a database language like SQL to analyze your data, but it's all inside of a function. So I kind of think of it as a pivot table in a function, if that's the best analogy. So that's a really fantastic thing. It's quite challenging to learn at first, but it's definitely one of my favorite things about Sheets, and definitely one of the best things you can learn. And then the last thing that I really like is, because it's a web-based, it's a cloud-based product, it really integrates very well with the with other software on the web. So like we've mentioned already, other Google products, you've got scripting language there, so you can connect to other APIs and things. And I think that it does all of that stuff very, very well on that sort of web layer. So
Cynthia commented, "The pain in that old school process!" Exclamation mark. Okay.
what about, here's another one for you, is the I'm sure everyone can relate to this, where you have your Excel file, you know, and you email it to your colleague or your boss, whatever, and they send it back with underscore master, and then you write underscore with a date on with your initials, and then send it back to another person in the office who adds underscore, you know, the next day's date or something. And it sort of goes around the office until the file name is, you know, 500 characters long, and then you have to make a copy with a brand new name to start over. So then another nice thing actually about Sheets is the sharing and the collaboration, of course, is that everyone can just be invited into that one document. All the changes are there. Anybody can make those changes if they have the right editing rights. And then you have the version history to go back in time to, you know, if you ever make a mistake. I had some very heart-stopping moments in the corporate day when the pressure was on and you realize you deleted a column you shouldn't have done or something like that. And, you know, there was some heart-stopping moments there that you don't really tend to get with Sheets.
Okay, we talked about your favorite things. You had about 50 things, so that's good. You're in the right niche for sure. What about things that have surprised you about using Sheets? Is there anything where there are some cool features that you didn't anticipate? Maybe something where the learning curve was easier or harder than you expected? Any challenges along the way? Any surprises along the way?
Yeah, good question. And I think just before we get to that, Shell, I used Excel for a long time actually, and I think we can talk. Well, actually, we can talk about. I think the differences probably a little bit later, but they're both phenomenal products. You know, there are some things Excel does better. A few things I think Sheets has a little edge on, but they're both just absolutely phenomenal tools. And the fact that here we are, I think Excel was, I don't know how old it is now, or spreadsheets rather, sort of 40 or 50 years old or something, the idea. And they're still the #1 office tool. It just shows you how, you know, how phenomenal they are. So surprises, I think one of the most surprising things was when I was proficient with Excel, could do a lot of it was comfortable with a lot of the formulas and the coding and charts and things. And when I moved across the Sheets is kind of how similar they were. In a way, you could almost just immediately, once you got used to the layout, things were a little simpler. But it didn't mean that you couldn't do most of the stuff I could do in Excel. I could port across into Sheets and just, it would work, you know, the same way. The formulas are largely the same. The scripting is one area where it's very different. So probably, you know, that was certainly a big surprise, because I had this misconception that it was sort of a toy spreadsheet program at first. And I think back 5 years ago, it wasn't a toy spreadsheet program, but it was nowhere near as fully featured as it is today. So what else then? Let me see if I, yeah, I think another surprise actually, I guess, is that, you know, when you have two Google Sheet files, and you need to maybe do a VLOOKUP between the two, or you need to click onto a cell in the other one, you can't just click across the way you do in Excel. So when you have two desktop files in Excel and you click from one into the other, your computer can find that file path between the two on your local site, on your local machine, and just do that connection for you. In Google Sheets, they're two cloud files, so there's no way, you know, they're just two browser tabs. They don't know that connection path at all. So you have to use a special formula called import range, to actually bring data from one Google Sheet file into another Google Sheet file. So there are some workflow differences because of the cloud nature of the product that can trip you up a little bit at first, that you need to just get used to and understand.
Let's keep talking about some of the Sheets Excel similarities or differences for a minute. I know one that always sticks out to me is that I use spark lines all the time in Excel just to get, the miniature at a glance charts, get a quick glance of what's going on. And in Excel, you click some buttons along the top. You go to like insert spark line and you get this little picture. But in Sheets, you have to write a formula. So I just go to your blog post that's the most comprehensive one available about how to do spark lines and how to tweak the formula to adjust things like the color of the spark line, the range of the spark line. I feel like pivot tables are also, I haven't done pivot tables in Sheets. I've never needed to for anything, but I feel like they are probably different. I don't know. What are some other similarities or differences?
Yeah, so just on the spark lines, I actually think the formulas is a better implementation than the clicking the buttons, because you can link it so easily to other formulas, and drag them down and move them around, and it has a sort of, I think that just actually, once you get used to the formula, because it is a little more challenging than just clicking buttons at first, but then it does give you more flexibility, I think. So the sparkline formula is certainly a difference. That import range to bring data from one sheet to another is another difference that we talked about. So in my mind, though, there are three big differences where Excel still has significant advantages over Sheets. The first one is obvious. That's just the data size. So Excel has 1 million rows and however many tens of thousands of columns theoretically, so you can get pretty big data sets. Google Sheets is 5 million cells total for your workbook now. And they keep increasing that limit. So it went from 2 million to 5 million last year, I think it was. And I know that 10 million is sort of rumored at some point. So, Sheets is sort of catching up there, but it still lags behind Excel. But one thing I'll say though is if you're bumping up against, or you're getting slow Excel files or slow Google Sheets, that's generally a good indication that your data is probably getting too big for the spreadsheet format, and you should really move to a database. Spreadsheets aren't meant to be stores for gigantic data sets. They're meant for working with smaller data sets and giving you that flexibility to do your analysis. So that's one area. A second area that's sort of closely related actually is the data analysis tools that Excel has still are superior to Google Sheets. So things like the goal seek and the analysis tool pack and those sorts of things. They don't have the data model, for example, and the Excel tables. Some of those don't have direct equivalents in Google Sheets. There are some add-ons you can use, but generally they're not as good as the Excel versions or the native Excel stuff. The third one is charts, actually. So this might be interesting for the group here. Is one thing you'll know with Excel charts is you can pretty much customize anything on the chart down to the individual pixels almost. You can pick that one out and say, I want that one to be blue or 0.10x the rest of it sort of size. And Google Sheets doesn't have anywhere near that level of granularity of control over things. They're gradually, they're always improving. So recently, we've got more control over how the axes look in Google Sheets. So you can change the tick marks, you can display the axes or not display them. And that was all launched just fairly recently, the last few months. Whereas before that, you always just had the axes just where the axes, and that was that. So that's one thing that Excel does better, that I certainly miss a little bit actually from the Excel days, because you can or you can do pretty incredible visualizations with Excel if you're prepared to put in the time. That's the drawback is, you sort of can go down these rabbit holes of tweaking every little thing and to make your chart look a certain way. But the charts though are catching up again. It's like those other two things, the data size and the data analytics capabilities. Google Sheets, it's improving and changing all the time. So these things are catching up. And the charts as they are right now are excellent. I use them all the time myself. I'm actually about to start creating some more resources for charts in Google Sheets. So very powerful. They're just not as granular in terms of the control you have over the individual elements. And then, so they're the areas Excel I think, has the edge. If we flip it around and think about where Sheets does better, we've already talked about some of these actually, and that's the collaboration aspect of it, the version history, working seamlessly on the web with other products like forms and slides and things. So I think that's where Google Sheets does really well.
I try to stay in touch with all of the additions that Sheets has, because I feel like someday soon, within the next couple of years, it's not going to be a decade away. I think it's going to be the next couple of years. I feel like the charting is going to have to catch up to Excel, because that's so understood that that's kind of such a major difference. I feel like Google must know, like, everybody likes Excel's charts and ours are kind of down here. They must be aware of that.
Yeah.
And I wonder, what else have you seen that's improved over the past couple of years? I've been a loyal newsletter subscriber on yours for a while, so I get your Monday updates. I just got the one a couple hours ago today, telling me about all the new and improved features that luckily you keep track of. But what else has been added? Because I feel like this is just such a promising tool that I can't just say like, oh, I'm not going to use Sheets because I don't like their charts, because in a couple of years, I think their charts are probably going to be fantastic. I'm hoping so, at least.
Yeah, well, actually, I think they are pretty, they're really good already. I think it's just, if you're, you're way out there doing the sort of crazy customization charts, you'll find it easier with Excel. So one thing that was introduced recently was something called connected sheets, which is, so we talked about the data size being kind of a limitation of spreadsheets generally. And connected sheets are sort of taking Google Sheets as the front, if you like, the interface where you or I would sit and do our work. But then all of your data is stored in something called Google BigQuery, which is a gigantic data store. And so that was launched a couple of months ago. And it means that you can basically you can work on data sets that have tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions of rows of data, and still write formulas and queries, pivot tables in Google Sheets that go analyze that data. So your data doesn't sit in the spreadsheet anymore, it sits in the database, but you use the spreadsheet to just interact directly with the database. And that's a phenomenal tool. That really does sort of change the landscape in my mind for companies that do have these big data sets. So you drop all of your data into a big data store. You've maybe got 100 million records, but instead of needing a developer to go and access that data, anybody who can use a pivot table can just go and do a pivot table, drag category across and then drag some values in. And maybe you'll see, okay, client A, or rather region A had 59 million events, maybe it's website traffic, I don't know what it is. And then, region B had 34 million. And, you can sort of start to work with data that's just way outside the normal bounds of spreadsheets. So connected sheets is really interesting to see that come on and develop. The charts, as I said, the charts and pivot tables have dramatically improved in the last couple of years, last year. So I think that we'll just continue to see them improve and improve. What else has come along? The size, again, as I said, has moved from 2 million to 5 million. But in terms of the core product now, it's definitely more stable than when I first started using it 5 years ago. I mean, in terms of the change. So the core product feels very much like the core product now, and these are improvements to it rather than sort of big wholesale steps forward. I think another thing that we'll see that's coming up is the integration of AI. So we're seeing that already. Google Sheets has an explore feature. And so say if you have a data set, you can just highlight the data set, click the explore button, and kind of take your hands off the wheel and see what charts it gives you and what pivot tables it gives you. So not really, it's not something I would use because I feel pretty comfortable knowing what data I want to use or do with my data. So I would, pretty much go and try and figure that out myself. But if you're learning how to use pivot tables or not really sure what the data might show you at first, those sorts of tools I think are going to become really interesting and more prevalent than they are now.
Okay, last question, and then I'll turn it over to our audience to ask questions. I see some good questions already from Cynthia and from Bobby coming in, so type in your questions as Ben and I are discussing this last one. Okay, so Ben, what is something about Sheets that people usually don't know? Some hidden feature or hidden gem that you just love that you wish more people knew about?
Well, I think people will be surprised at what you can do and how proficient Sheets is as a product now. I think that some of the clients I've worked with and done trainings with, there's a resistance from their colleagues or the people working at these organizations to use Google Sheets because they're worried they won't be able to do the analysis they're trying to do. And there are some cases when that's true, when it's they've been using, say, the Excel data models heavily and that doesn't move across. But for the vast majority of regular spreadsheet work, it does work just as well. Then some of the things we mentioned, the query function, that alone is, I would find it hard to go to Excel now and not have that available. I use that function all the time. It's a bit of a challenging function at first. You need to learn syntax, and it's not the easiest thing in the world. But anytime you're doing kind of data manipulation, it sort of replaces about 10 other functions or even pivot tables, and you can do it all now with a single function. So that's pretty fantastic. It also, as it uses this SQL language, this database language. So if you're at all technically minded and think you might want to learn about databases one day, then it's kind of a nice stepping stone actually to that world. It gives you some insight there. That will do, I think, for me talking. I'd love to hear some questions.
You've got some really good questions, and I actually don't know how you're going to answer these. Okay, so Bobby asks, would you have some Dataviz examples you've created in Sheets to show us, or dashboard examples? Would love to hear your thoughts on comparing Excel charting versus Sheets. Bobby had typed this question kind of before we talked about some of the similarities and differences in charting, but do you have any Dataviz or dashboard examples from your blog or maybe from inside courses that you can pull up? If not, I could go stalk your blog real quick and find some cool chart examples.
Yeah, sure. So again, this is on my the website here, a couple of articles. So these are some articles for sort of web marketing type work. So let me show you, actually thinking about this, probably the best example is, so what I've done is I've set up I have Google Analytics data, I have my email data that I'm interested in sort of terms of how many subscribers I have and what the growth rate is there. And then I have some other metrics I track around some of the social media stuff. So just some metrics around my business to give me a pulse on the business in terms of whether it's growing and whether I'm having a good week, that kind of thing. And I use Google Sheets to set up that dashboard. So let me see if I can find one here. Here we go.
I would have loved if you said, but I use Excel to track that, because I feel a little silly sometimes when I tell people, like, actually, I really like using Sheets, even though I'm an Excel instructor. But
so let me actually.
Oh, this is great.
So this is easiest to see actually. What I do every day is I take the Google Sheets and I've written a little script that turns it into a PDF and then emails me the PDF at 5 a.m. So that the first email I get every day is just this exact dashboard with all of my metrics on for my business. And so every day I can just glance at this and say, oh, my traffic was good yesterday, or my email subscribers are good today. And just kind of make sure I just know what's going on with the business. And I never need to go back and actually look at the Google Sheets or log into these services to find the data. And so this is the sheet here. I'm not sure why it's taking a moment to load, but this is the sheet. There we go. So let me make it a bit smaller. That's a bit too small. And yeah, just it gets converted into a PDF by a little script that I wrote, and then turns into that PDF, and that PDF just gets emailed to me every day. And that's pretty nice. That's one example actually of that sort of nice integration you can get from on that web layer with Google Sheets. Then if I just show you on the website, actually, Anne can share these links afterwards, I'm sure, but I have, so this is just on my homepage. I have a bunch of articles about charting. They're a little bit old now, and I'm going to be adding a lot more new ones as well, but there's things like the Sparkline one, for example, that Anne mentioned, how you do that with a formula. That might be quite interesting, actually, because it's quite different, like we said, about than Excel. So, yeah.
Just to give people a sense of how magical Ben's dashboard is that he just pulled up, Ben and I are also in a mastermind for small business owners for companies of one. And we have groups where we like share business tips and productivity hacks. And I thought I was being productive because I no longer manually fill in my own dashboard. I now have my assistant do it at the end of every month. And she goes in and pulls in a couple of key Google Analytics things I want, or a couple of key like social media stats, similar to the stats that Ben tracks. But I have to pay somebody for about an hour of time to do manual data entry. So now I'm kicking myself, like, why don't I just have my dashboard emailed to myself at 5 a.m. every day? So someday.
Well, I'm not up at 5 a.m. I just want to clarify.
Okay, let's see. This is another great question. Bobby asks, would be curious about the security/privacy of content in Google Sheets. Does Google read or capture content for its own purposes if the content is stored in Google's cloud? I feel like this is a common question that I get, especially from federal government groups I work with or universities. There's always this kind of privacy concern, but I don't know any of the details about it, about what they're concerned about, to be honest. So Ben, fill us in.
Sure, yeah, so yeah, the data is all obviously in Google servers. G Suite falls under the Google Cloud company, if you like. That's sort of a one arm of Google, and they do not read any of your data in Google Cloud. So it's different. It's not like your web searches that they obviously will go and read that sort of stuff. At least that's what that's what they say. I believe them. I have never done any digging, but they don't use your data the same way they wouldn't read your Gmail messages to send ads to you. So if you're comfortable using Gmail, then I wouldn't feel any personal objection then to using Google Cloud services. I think that's certainly, as private as your Gmail. And honestly, actually, the other thing that always gives me comfort is that if Google's probably very unlikely to get hacked because the security is so good, and they have some of the best engineers in the world working on that sort of stuff. So I feel 100% safe having my data there, that it's not going to fall into the wrong hands. So I think that's but I think that moving to the cloud obviously is another issue, is whether you're comfortable moving data to the cloud. But yeah, I mean, there's people out there who have a lot more knowledge, obviously, on this subject. But the party line from Google is that they don't read your data in Google Cloud.
Cynthia has a question about Latin American countries in particular. She says, have you used Sheets in other languages? How does Sheets fare in other countries? She's specifically interested in Latin American ones.
Sure. I can't speak to using Sheets in Latin America. It's there and it's available, I'm pretty sure, but I've never used it in those countries, obviously. And what I have done, though, is the syntax for formulas is a little bit different for certain locales, certain locations. And so what you can do is change the location of your Google Sheet. So for example, when I was researching this, I changed all my location of my sheets to Italy for a couple of days while I worked on these blog posts. And in Europe, Italy, Germany, France, they use the comma for the decimal instead of the period that we use. And so obviously the formulas are all a little bit different, because if you just use regular sort of US or English formulas with the dots and the periods, then you're going to sort of get your formulas all wrong, because it's not a comma that separates all the pieces of your formula anymore. It's a semicolon that you use. So it does work, in different languages. You can then use it. The syntax, though, is a little bit different. But I don't know. I can't speak to like I said, to the South American variations there. So probably one to Google.
Just fly down there, check it out for us.
I know I should. That would be real research.
But you have traveled around to teach Google Sheets. I feel like you were in Google's London office last year sometime training. Did I imagine that? That was you, yeah?
I haven't been to the London office, but I've been to their New York office. So that was fun because the Google Sheets team is actually based in New York. So I went to hang out with them for an afternoon. That was a lot of fun. And then, I've done teaching in Copenhagen. Actually was the last one, back in the last international trip. That was the very end of last year, actually, sadly.
Madison asks, what is the best way to learn about new features of Sheets? I often learn new features only when I need it for a specific purpose. I feel you, Madison, not proactively to think about ways to improve future work in Sheets. I know that you have an excellent weekly newsletter. Tell us more about that. Tell us about your blog posts, your courses, maybe other resources that you love too.
Yeah. So every Monday at about 11, I'll send out a weekly tip for Google Sheets, and it's not brand new stuff, but it's stuff that I try and unearth and it's always to try and improve everybody's abilities with Sheets, if you like. So today, for example, it was about custom number formatting. Sometimes it's about charts, sparklines, formulas. Occasionally we have a formula challenge. So one week I'll leave you with a question to try and answer for the following week. So yeah, by all means, please sign up for that if you're interested. And I always try and highlight anything new, major that comes along. There we go. There's today's email. That's what it looks like. So it's sort of like mini blog posts really in an email. And then I have some courses, a little bit like Anne does actually, specifically on Google Sheets, everything from a beginner course through to how to do coding with your Google Sheets. And then also the blog itself has a lot of articles and tutorials. Actually, and one of the sites that might be of interest to all of you is a site I set up called exceltosheets.com, specifically to help people, sort of a guide to moving across from Excel to Sheets. So this one here on the page, the guide there. Gosh, my face is a bit big on that when I see it now. I should maybe change that. But the guide there, that first tab, has it's quite an in-depth article about the differences between the two, and that would be a good place to start actually if you were sort of moving across from one to the other. So I think they're the best places. In terms of other places, Google itself has a G Suite updates blog. I'm not sure. Let me see if I can find the URL for you for the chat, where you can actually find specifically, when things do update. Here it is.
While you're pulling that up, quick question on your courses, because aren't you thinking about developing a Dataviz in Sheets course? Maybe you're working on it now.
So
I hope I'm not telling any secrets to the world. But
no, that's fine actually. So the next course that I've just about started to work on is all about the chart tool, Dataviz principles, how to make your sheets look really good. So I have a dashboard course and I have a data analysis course, and I guess this one would sort of wedge in between those two a little bit, and be all about really how to take that chart tool and create the charts that we want to create rather than just the standard ones. How to take it from 0 to 100 sort of thing, because it's possible to do some really cool charts actually. Let me show you a few actually that I've been working on. Nobody has ever seen these. This is, if I can, let me find them. So Can everybody see that now? Okay, great. So these two on the left here are just our Google Sheet charts. And these two on the right here are the original charts from the New York Times. So I'm sure that this is something Anne's familiar with. Sometimes you see charts that you love that organizations have done, and you want to see if you can recreate it yourself in Excel or Sheets. And that's a great learning technique, actually. So I tried to recreate these two over here that New York Times publishes. And they're fairly simple, but they look quite nice when you set them up and side by side like that. Another one here is this lollipop chart. So again, not something that you could just do out of the box with Google Sheets. You have to set up your data in this kind of funny way. It's not the easiest thing in the world until you sort of learn these tricks, but it's possible to do these kinds of charts in Sheets as well. So there you go. That's it. There's a few from the course.
I think you've sold me on Sheets, because the last time I tried it for charting, it must have been, I'm going to say 2 years ago, and I just couldn't get even bar charts or stacked bar charts to format how I liked. And I am one of those like crazy 1% people who I want to, I recognize I'm unique in this way, is what I'm saying, that I want to format every single thing in the chart, but actually, as do many people in this course too, right? So seeing these examples is really refreshing, because I honestly had no idea that Sheets could do this. So if you could just hurry up releasing that course, I will be your first student in it.
I will. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Yeah, hopefully, I'm hopeful to get that done in the next 2 months. So keep an eye out for the end of the year.
Okay. And then last thing, show us your shirt and tell us about SheetsCon, because that is also an excellent way to learn.
Here we go. It's the answer to any mystery in life. So this was a t-shirt, a swag t-shirt from SheetsCon, and SheetsCon was an online conference, or is an online conference rather, for Google Sheets that I ran in March. Actually, it was funny. It was just as the pandemic was hitting here. And so we had the SheetsCon conference was on the Wednesday and the Thursday, and Friday was the last day my boys went to their daycare. Thank goodness, because if they'd shut the daycare the week earlier, they'd have been gate crashing the SheetsCon thing, which would have been interesting. But it's a 2-day online conference. This year we had, I think, 12 speakers, all about different parts of Google Sheets, some beginner, some advanced. And yeah, we're going to try and run it again next year in March or April. It'll be a 1 or 2 day, probably 2-day conference again online. And I'll try and get a good group of speakers around to talk about some interesting and innovative Google Sheets solutions. We actually had one of the Google Sheets team project managers come along as well and give a talk. And actually they launched a feature that day that he announced at the event as well. So that was very, very cool. So yeah, hopefully come along next year in March. Look out for that one. That's sheetscon.com. I'll put that in here actually.
While Ben's pulling that up, I have one final question for the group. Type in the chat menu, or, there's only a dozen of us today. If you want to just talk and take yourself off mute, that works too. But let me know your favorite thing that you learned from Ben today, any particular insight, tip or trick, something that you didn't know before. I shared mine, like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that Sheets had done so much to their charting. I'm really, really, really pleased about that. Okay, other insights or tips that you love learning about, let me know in the chat, or just go ahead and talk. That works too. Madison says, thank you. This is very helpful. Bobby says, thank you for your time today, Ben.
Well, great to meet you all, and thank you very much for putting up with me for an hour.
This was great. Lisa says, the possibilities seem endless. Agreed. Cynthia says, efficiency between Google tools, from form to Sheets to slides.
Yeah, I think that's such a good, honestly, that's the best workflow for things like the any surveys and that kind of thing. It's such a powerful combination.
Vivian says, I haven't tried any charts and sheets. Now I'm inspired! Exclamation mark. Me too. All right. Ben, thank you so much for your time today.
All right.
I loved learning from you. Round of applause, everybody.
Thank you very
All
much,
right.
Anne, and nice to meet you all.
All right.
And
Thank you
also,
so much.
yeah, enjoy the rest of your course with Anne. She's a phenomenal teacher, so make the most of Anne's brain while you've got it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye, Ben.
Thank
Bye,
you.
team.
Bye-bye. Bye.